As we see the sunset on 2020 and the dawn of 2021, it enables me to look back at the last year and work out just how much my Model 3 has cost me to run. So if you own a Model 3, are thinking of getting one, or just own an EV, in this video I'll be looking back at my entire running costs of 2020, including things like brake disc wear and tear, insurance, and obviously the big one, the amount of electricity I've used. So if you want to compare the running costs of your car, stay tuned where I'll be working out the grand total and the average pence per mile at the end of the video. We all know that electric cars are way cheaper to run than combustion cars, but by how much? Well, I've sat down and worked out how much my brake pads have worn, the tyre wear and tear, insurance, pretty much everything I can think of. The things I haven't included though are things like depreciation and interest on loans, because I appreciate everyone's situation is going to be slightly different. So depending on whether you're doing PCP or finance, you can just add those on at the end. I was actually quite worried there wasn't going to be enough content for this video because honestly the running costs are minimal, but you'll be pleased to know I did find some. Now, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to follow the little car across the screen to that subscribe button and click subscribe if you're interested in anything to do with Teslas or electric vehicles, because that's what this channel is all about. Right, on to the costs, or not as the case may be. As you're probably aware, electric vehicles are exempt from road tax, but when I got my Model 3, because the list price was over £40,000 once you exclude the government grant, it fell into a bracket of something that was informally known as the luxury car tax, which meant from years 2 to 6 of ownership I had to pay £300, totaling £1,500 over the lifetime. Thankfully though, that was scrapped last year, which means the tax on this vehicle for the last year was absolutely zero. Similarly, because it's a brand new car, it means it's not had to have an MOT yet, so again, the MOT costs absolutely zero. I've owned the car now for 18 months, and you'd have thought at some point during that time I would have had to have got it serviced. But when I asked Tesla about this, they said that because none of the parts that they service affect the warranty, you don't need to get it serviced every year, unlike a lot of new cars. In fact, they've suggested you get it serviced every 2 years or 25,000 miles. And because none of the parts that they service are major, it should cost you about £250. But the thing is, it's optional. Now, I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to get it serviced because I don't really know what they do. So if anyone's actually got their car serviced and can fill me in, please let me know. I will come on to things that cost money shortly, believe me, I am trying. But because there's no engine, well, I haven't had to top it with oil at all, and I've got ceramic coating on my windscreen, which means I haven't had to top up my windscreen wiper fluid at all. Moving on to things that have actually cost me money. And when I say that, these technically haven't cost me any money yet. And that's because they will need replacing in the future, so I thought it was important to include in the mileage costs, but I haven't actually replaced them. And that's things like the brake pads and the tyres. So because I haven't replaced them, I might be wrong with some of the figures here. Feel free to correct me if you've actually replaced them yet. For the purpose of the calculations, we'll say I've done 6,500 miles last year, which is close enough to what I've actually done. Looking at the brake pads then, Tesla have said that the brake pads will need replacing anything between 80 and 120,000 miles. So for argument's sake, we'll say they'll get replaced at 100,000 miles. For anyone that's new to EVs and think that's quite a long while before you need to replace your brake pads compared to normal cars, is because in EVs you use regen braking, so you rarely actually touch your brake pedal and you can get away with driving with just the accelerator. So for that reason, your brake pads last a lot longer than normal cars. If we say the brake pads will cost £300 to replace and last 100,000 miles, based on the fact I've done 6,500 miles last year, that means that I'll effectively have spent £19.50 on my brake pads. Bargain. Okay, on to the tyres then. Now from my research, it looks like that a tyre will wear out or need replacing every 20,000 miles on a wheel that's driven by a motor, and then every 40,000 miles on one that's not. My Model 3's rear wheel drive, so I'm planning to swap them around halfway through, so I'm expecting to replace all 4 tyres at 30,000 miles. Currently, the Pilot Sport Acoustic costs £185 to replace, which is what's fitted to my Model 3. So to replace all 4 tyres will cost £740. Divide that over the lifetime of the tyre and that works out about 2.5 pence per mile. So my tyre wear and tear for the whole of 2020 was £160. Next on my list of running costs then is insurance, and I appreciate it is going to be wildly different for every individual, but because it was part of my running costs, it had to go in there. So I renewed my insurance in September 2020 and it cost me £467. In September 2019, it cost me £375. I'm not quite sure why it jumped up actually. Did anyone else find that? I'm guessing it was because of COVID, because let's face it, everything else is. But if you average that out over the cost of the entire year, it works out £402. As I said, I appreciate this is going to be wildly different for each individual, but it gives you an idea of what insurance might cost you if you're in my situation, which is over 9 years, no claims, no accidents, and I keep my Model 3 in the garage. Right, on to the big one, how much electricity I used. Now, my house has got solar panels, so I'm going to talk about that as well. But to work this out, I've had to use a few guesstimations in the sense of I've looked at my 2019 usage versus 2020, but because the only thing that significantly changed in my household was the fact I've started charging my Model 3, then I think it's fair to say that the extra increase is going to be down to that. So in 2019, I used 966 kilowatt hours of electricity. The rest was all exported to the grid. Then I got my smart charger fitted, which meant that I use a lot more of my solar energy I produce because basically rather than exporting it, it channels it into my Model 3. So in 2020, I actually used 1,635 kilowatt hours of electricity I produced, which resulted in an increase of 669 kilowatt hours, which I'm guessing all went into my Model 3 because it wouldn't have gone anywhere else. If you work on the basis then that that'll get me about 4 miles per kilowatt, that's about 2,500 miles that I've got purely on solar energy, which is pretty wicked. Right, onto the energy that cost me money, and that's the stuff I imported. So in 2019, I imported 1,597 kilowatt hours of electricity, whereas in 2020, it went up to 2,679. As I said, nothing significant changed in my household, so I'm going to assume that's all down to charging my EV. Because I only charged the Model 3 overnight on the cheap electricity rate of 5 pence per kilowatt hour, then that means I spent £54.10p on electricity. If you're thinking about, well, what did I spend on supercharging? Well, thanks to you guys that used my referral code that got you 1,000 free supercharge miles, you also got me 1,000 free supercharge miles. So my supercharging also didn't cost me anything. So that £54.10 is literally the only cost of my electricity for that entire year, which is crazy, isn't it, when you think about it? Now, if you're wondering how many miles per kilowatt and things like that, well, it works out as 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour or 270 watts per mile, which is the equivalent of 124 MPGe. Not bad. What does this all mean for the grand total? So if we add it up, we've got £19.50 for the brakes, £160 for the tyre wear and tear, which means I'm actually spending more on tyre wear and tear than I am my electricity, which is crazy. And then £54.10p for my electricity usage because all my supercharging was free. So that means my variable costs based on the mileage, or that would be affected by the mileage, was just £233.60. If you then spread that over the 6,500 miles, it means my average running cost was just 3.6 pence per mile. How cheap is that? And that's including wear and tear stuff. If you add on insurance on top of that, it brings the grand total for 2020 to just £635.60. But if we go back to that £233 for the whole year a second, because I don't know about you, but I've got some combustion friends that probably spend that a month on fuel. You know who you are, Golf R. So feel free, when people have questioned your purchase of an EV, to forward this video onto them to just show how cheap it is to actually drive and own an EV. I appreciate they're more upfront costs, but once you've got them, if you do enough mileage, they're going to pay for themselves in no time at all. That's all for this week. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, share, comment and subscribe. I will see you again soon.